CBSE schools, Central Board of Secondary Education, that is the common, which follows a common syllabus throughout India. And children from those schools or learners from those schools are exposed to literature quite early.
Karim. Oh, Karim.
They are exposed to literature quite early, say from standard class 3 or 4.
Oh, Karim. Mara.
Yeah, Sri Prasad.
Sir, please continue. Sir,
Yeah, fine. So no problem. So the learners with, I mean, that's what in CBSE schools, they are exposed to literature, literary texts quite early. That is from class 3 or 4, and as they, I mean, progress to the higher classes, like say from in classes 10 or 11 or 12, they are exposed to literary texts. They read the entire collection of Charles Dickens or George Eliot. All those literary texts they read. So sometimes some students muster courage to come and ask me, when are you going to teach us literature? But all of us know in engineering and technical institutes, the syllabus is purely language based. So the focus is more on the functions of language rather than literature. They are so disappointed. So we don't have prose, we don't have poetry. So is it going to be entirely skills based? Fine. So which means they miss literature a lot. So that is their perspective. So for them, language acquisition means only through literature. Now, I would like to discuss from the English language learners point of view. So this is the term which is currently used in when I read research articles. It's commonly used. The term English language learners is now commonly used. Earlier, we used to refer to them as LEP students, that is learners with limited English proficient. They are limited English proficient learners. But now I think this is more euphemistic. We call them English language learners. So now we have to understand who is an English language learner in a country like India. So again, almost all my colleagues, my learned colleagues, they know that I mean, almost all in all government school colleges and government-aided colleges, English language learners are the majority. More than 72 or 80 to 90% learners come with very low proficiency in language. And when you when you think about the background, they are from a very socioeconomically backward situations. And what is the language acquisition that takes place in them? There is no so they come from a very poor language. Acquisition environments. So the only source for these ELLs, for those language learners, is the teacher. The teacher is the only source through which they can learn little. So now somebody can ask the question. So with so much of technological advancement, with internet, can't they hone their language skills? Can they enrich their language skills? Again, to what extent the internet has reached the nook and corners of the country. And we all know now when during the lockdown period, when teachers are trying their best to reach out the students have a list of problems, connectivity issues. So with all these issues, an English language learner definitely needs a lot of support, and the only source through which he can learn little is the teacher. So what would be his perception? What would he think when I ask this question? Do you think the syllabus caters to the needs of you? Do you think it enriches your language skills? And nobody has ever come and told me, no English language learner in government college has not come and told me that, okay, we don't want literature, but it's my assumption. Out of observation, I'm just conveying, I'm just expressing it with you. For them, it is the same. Whether it is excerpts from Macbeth or whether it is from Julius Caesar, or it is Stephen Leacock's Max Fix with the Photographer, or John Milton's Paradise Lost. These are just the excerpts which I taught previous semester. So for them, whatever the text is, it doesn't make much difference. So what they for the language with lot of aspirations to check to see how I can make literature work in the classroom, it becomes a bit challenging because in some universities, hello, can I continue? Hello, are you?
Sir, please do continue, sir. You're clear,
Thank you,
sir.
thank you,
Please do
thank you,
continue.
thank you, madam. So because I read a message that the host has muted me, so I thought like to so brief.
No. You can be heard. You can
Thank
be
you.
heard, sir. Please continue.
Thank you, madam. So for the English language learner in majority of the institutions, what they want is whether just now I listed, these are texts which I taught the previous semester and I'll be teaching. And my college, which is affiliated to a university, now has 100% literature-based syllabus. And just now I discussed the learner background, what kind of learners I have. It's a small town, and there are villages around, and those students come to college with a fervent hope that they would learn something and pick up some language skills. So with this background, I have to make the literary text work in the classroom. So most of them, when you ask them, they say what they want. They say just give us a summary. So if you give them a summary, if you give them the essay, they are extremely happy. If the teachers don't take the effort to give the summary, yes, there are guidebooks available, there are guides available, so that they can just buy the guide and memorize and write answers and get a pass. So and from the ELL point of view, whether it is literature or language, out of my observation, it doesn't make much difference because even uh, last 2 years before, in the previous syllabus, we had 20% language component, and there will be a dialogue writing. And even the dialogue writing, they'll memorize and they'll come and write. And it throws a lot of light on the issues of testing. So when we say a skills-based approach, or when we try to introduce a little bit of a language for learners, how do we test? For example, we want to test their speaking skills, their spoken ability, but how are we doing it? Only by writing. So again, this is totally contradictory. And in the guidebooks, they give different situations, 3 or 4 different situations, and there are 10 exchanges listed over there. These children memorize them because they are 100% sure one of those questions will appear in the end semester. So this is the observation which I made. And for him, whether it is language or literature, whether you have different goals, doesn't matter, because for him, what he wants is just a pass so that he can get his degree. Okay, so now I would like to focus on the syllabus. So it is again the same, what purpose does the syllabus serve? Does it serve the purpose? Like again, majority of the universities, when you take a look at the components which we are supposed to discuss, we get a feel like what kind of thought has gone into it. And again, another question arises: does it try to widen the gap further? For example, this literature and language gap, which is already existing, it should sort of try to bridge the gap, but I somehow feel that it almost widens the gap further. And the next question: what is the basis on which the textbook or the course book gets approved by the Board of Studies? So again, it's a question which nobody can answer, because on what basis again a textbook or a course book gets prescribed. And that takes us to the next question: is there any hidden agenda, which I cannot discuss in a public forum. And so I leave it to the learned audience to interpret in whatever way they want. Yeah. Continuing with the syllabus, we have a general philosophy of education. So we need to consider the general philosophy of education tells that we have to consider the following factors before we sort of finalize the syllabus. So what are the crucial factors? First and foremost is who. So who are the learners, and again, who are the teachers? So in this context, I'm reminded of an approach which was quite popular in Tamil Nadu some 10 years before, which was introduced at the school level. It was called activity-based learning. So the buzzword now is activities. You engage the child in an activity, so he learns. So somebody has proposed this idea to the government, and the government faithfully implemented it at the school level. So what I'm talking about is these, which happened in schools and which is still being followed in many schools, what they call it as the activity-based learning. So I'm just trying to give an example of who, that is who includes both the learners as well as the teachers. So before we finalize on a particular methodology or the syllabus, we have to take into consideration both the learners as well as the teachers. So now activity-based learning, I'm not against the activity-based learning or the methodology. It's a wonderful methodology wherein we can ensure learner participation, we can motivate the learners, we can make the learners feel comfortable in the class. Language learning happens in a stress-free environment. Yes, accept it. But are the teachers trained? That is a very crucial question. So it is not that easy to try out communicative, CLT, work in class, that is communicative language teaching. So ABL is loosely based on communicative language teaching methodology, which strongly advocates don't teach formal aspects of grammar, don't teach form, teach only the functions. Create a learning environment wherein you will involve the learners, participate the learners, what in ELT we call it as participatory pedagogy. So make the learners involved in the process of learning and they will learn. Everything is fine, but the key question one has to ponder is what kind of training given to them? Some training was given to them, say for 10 or 15 days. Again, after a month, one more follow-up training will be given. After that, there is no support system available for the teacher. So without considering these factors, the syllabus is framed, and it is like sometimes I use the word forced it on the teacher, who is one of the most important stakeholders in the field of education. So this is what I mean by who. So the question of whether the syllabus adheres to a general philosophy of education. So the next question is where. Where is that nothing but the teaching context. So whether in what teaching context this syllabus is going to happen, whether it will work in this particular context. Next question, when am I going to use this syllabus? When in the sense like whether in the first semester or in the second semester or in the final semester. Sometimes in technical institutes, even in the final semester, we have a language component that is to prepare them for employment, what they call it as employability skills and soft skills. These three crucial factors largely, will largely impact what and how. So what is nothing but the content, and how again is the methodology. Ideally speaking, the first three things should be considered, and only then the last two things we should give thought about. We should think about the last two factors. But I think in almost in all, in universities, it's the other way around. So we decide on what the learner will learn. The syllabus is decided first. And that too, when a syllabus is decided, we also have the testing in mind. So what if I cannot get this particular aspect, because how do I test? The end semester, the issues pertaining to assessment and testing largely decides, I would say, the content. So it should be the other way around. So in what way? What are the needs of the learner? So in what way my learners will be benefited? So there is nothing called needs analysis that is done, which in ELT, they largely focus on before we introduce a course to the learners, it is mandatory that we conduct a sort of a needs analysis survey and try to understand what the learners want. But it is so ironical, the learners who are, I would say, the most very, significant stakeholders in the field of education and the teachers who are going to translate whatever the syllabus says into the classroom, they are, I don't think they are consulted. I think handful of people sit there, decide, and the board of studies approves it, and teachers, we are supposed to go to the classroom and face a lot of challenges, and we somehow try to complete the syllabus because there is always the threat looming large. Have you completed the syllabus? So now I think almost all of us would have frantically reached our students because somehow or the other we wanted to ensure that the syllabus has been completed. So this is what happens, but it should be the other way around. And this is one component I thought that deserves a lot of thinking. Yeah, with this, I would like to move on to the next issue. So given the challenges and constraints, whatever I discussed so far, there are a lot of constraints and there are a lot of challenges. But in spite of that, I thought, why we should just keep on harping on the divide? Why should we always say there is they are poles apart? I was also reminded of, I don't remember the name of the poet, but East is East and West is West. Never the twain shall meet. So I thought, like, is it not? I don't think it's like that. So why don't I take the initiative and try to make literature work in the classroom? So based on that thought gave me this idea. So to talk on this particular topic, why literature and language are poles apart. So my slide tells me, like, I just listed out 3 models that are available on why literature in language teaching. And I think it's, yeah, 1 minute. Yeah, the first one is the cultural model and the language model and the personal growth model. It was Brumfitt who first sort of thought about it, and it was later advocated by Carter and Long. So what is the benefit? So I've sort of summarized the benefits of these models, the positive impact of these models, and how it positively impacts the learner. So I've taken the issue of how literature positively impacts the learner. So what are the positive, impact? The first one is it fosters intercultural understanding, and thereby it mitigates cultural differences. It encourages critical thinking. So critical thinking is the buzzword now. So wherever we go, people talk about critical thinking. We have to make our learners think critically so that we can prepare them to be global citizens. So it's quite interesting to observe that there are a lot of issues going around the world in terms of racial and cultural bullying. So, and which largely affects the students. The students get affected, and sometimes, because of this bullying, they drop out of school, which is a very disturbing trend. And not only at the school level, I think even at institutes of higher learning, these things do happen when there are cultural differences and when students cannot get along and when they bully each other. It affects them and leaves an indelible scar on the psyche of the one who gets bullied. So the positive aspect of literature, that is the first one, we can introduce literary texts which glorify multiculturalism, or which talks about the benefits of the diversity. We can These texts can be introduced in the classroom, and it also ensures critical thinking. And the next point is, again, it's a sort of a continuation, I would say. Integration of English language learners involves more than just linguistics. So we look, I look at it purely from the language point of view. So the learners, they don't have language. And again, I'm reminded of Basil Bernstein's verbal deficit theory. So where he claims, his claim was later refuted, but initially the claim, what Bernstein in his sociology of education, what was the claim? The claim he made was, learners who come from, socioeconomically backward communities, their L1 is not fully developed. So he says it is not only L2. We talk so much about the second language. We talk so much about they are not in a position to learn English. But he says that is that is also an important issue. But first focus on their L1. Their L1 is not fully developed. So in this context, he talks about the restricted code and the elaborated code. And let me not go into the details, but it reminds me, this particular point by Clayton reminds me of that. So why L1 is important? Why the first language is important? He says L1 is a wonderful resource. So we need to tap the L1 resources so that we can encourage learners to learn L2. So this is what we call, it's a sort of contrastive analysis, and wherein we say that it's positive transfer. So when you are L1, when you are very good in your first language, it generally facilitates second language learning. So he's the idea of it is purely linguistics, though they have only linguistic deficiency is not exactly true. Clayton says it involves cultural aspects also. So if they are not used to the culture, or if they resent the alien culture, then the benefits of schooling. So whatever benefits they're going to reap in schooling or at the university level, children will not get. And it is not only to do with linguistic aspects, but there are other social and cultural issues involved in that. So this takes me to the next point of this expansion of vocabulary. So yes, again, sometimes we used to long for our huge MA classes or our MPhil classes, and we'll be reminded of our professors. So what fine English, what vocabulary he has, what vocabulary madam has. So it definitely literature, when we read a lot of literature, it expands our vocabulary, it enriches our vocabulary. There is no doubt about that. So the next point which I have listed out is fluency in reading. So one might ask, what do we mean by fluency? So fluency has been described in different terms, but the simple definition we can say is fluency is largely equated to the way you speak. If somebody speaks fast, we generally say is a fluent speaker. So, but it is not the case, because somebody can speak very fast. At the same time, he might not get across his ideas. So fluency, I I had this definition from Professor Saraswati, my MPhil supervisor. Professor Saraswati once in an ELT class told me, like, fluency is nothing but if you can do something without much effort, and still if you're successful, that is what is fluency all about. So it is not we have to try and get what we mean by fluency, but fluency is not only in speaking, we do have fluency in reading and writing also. So sometimes we feel writers, we say he or she has a flair for writing, so his writing is so good. So what makes it so special? It is the same idea they would have conveyed, but we prefer to read one particular author because the style of writing, the flair for writing is something different. That is what we mean by fluency in reading. So when we read a lot of literature, when a learner is exposed to literary text, naturally it benefits both his reading and writing skills. And the next one, I'm going to focus on, it improves interpretive and inferential skills. Yes, I don't think I have to explain. It's quite obvious that we interpret. For example, one line can be interpreted in many ways. A quotation that comes to my mind is, less is more, Lucrezia Unjudged. So I think it's by Robert Browning in Andrea del Sarto. So I remember what kind of discussion it triggered in the classroom. And it went on for us together. So this is what literature does to the learner. It enriches his interpretive and his inferential skills, which are highly essential. And Virosin points out exposure to literature gives greater, the students, when they read, they get a lot of exposure to varieties of lexical and syntactical patterns, which is again very important for successful language learning. Just a second. So with this, I've almost done with my first half of the presentation. And the second half, what I have done is I've just taken a very simple short story by Ruskin Bond, and I tried this with my students. And why I did this, why it was done a year before, but I thought for this topic this would be to an extent related. So the objective of this particular task, reading task, followed by a speaking skills task, is to see whether I can make literature, a literary text, a short story, that would by Ruskin Bond. I felt that this language is quite simple, so I thought, why not try this in my classroom? It was done almost a year before, and I've just given you the excerpt. And before you read the excerpt, I just narrate the story and put it in a nutshell. It is between, it's about a beautiful friendship that blossoms between an old lady, Miss Mackenzie, and a small boy named Anil. Miss Mackenzie lives in a mansion, in a huge mansion, all alone, and she has a beautiful garden where she maintains, wonderful exotic wild flowers. So she likes flowers a lot. And Anil was a small boy in the vicinity when he goes to school. One day he was so fascinated, he was attracted by the flowers, so he just trespasses and he starts picking the flowers. So this is what happens in the story to begin with. And now if you read the excerpt, it would to an extent I think it will make we can understand it much better. So Miss Mackenzie comes in, asks him, what are you doing, why did you trespass? And the small boy Anil says, picking flowers, miss. And he held up a bunch of ferns and wildflowers. Oh, Miss Mackenzie was disarmed. It was a long time since she had seen a boy taking interest in flowers and, what was more, playing truant from school in order to gather them. Do you like flowers? She asked. Yes, miss. I'm going to be a botanist. You mean a botanist? And the excerpt continues. The boy says, yes, miss. And well, that's unusual. Most boys at your age want to be pilots or soldiers or perhaps engineers, but you want to be a botanist. Well, there's still hope for the world, I see. And do you know the names of these flowers? So what happens? The old lady lives all alone, and the boy takes interest in flowers, and she it becomes a routine for them to share and discuss wildflowers. And one fine day, Anil comes and informs the old lady that for my vacation, I am leaving for Delhi. I will come, I'll meet you after 3 months. And the lady, before he leaves, she has an encyclopedia. That is, encyclopedia on flowers, which she treasured because it was her brother who was using it, and so she treasures that. But she thinks it is better to give it to the small boy who evinces a lot of interest in botany. So, but the small boy, Anil hesitates. He says, I don't want, miss, that's how he addresses her. I don't want, miss, I'll come and take this book later from you. But Miss Mackenzie tells, no, you have to have this because I don't know whether when you come, I'll be here or not. So this is a sort of, it sounds quite ominous. And what happens after a few months when the winter is very harsh and because of the old age, Miss Mackenzie passes away. This is the story. This is the gist of the story, which I took it to my class and I tried with my students. So what happened in the classroom? So I told you they are undergraduate students from science departments because I happened to meet students from science departments. So I thought I would try it out with them, and it wasn't prescribed. So as I told you, it was not a prescribed text. Out of interest, I thought I just wanted to take it to class to check to see to what extent I am successful or to what extent I can manipulate or I can exploit literature in the language classroom. So the learners were from science backgrounds, undergraduate learners, second year undergraduate learners. They were, I asked them to read the story and respond orally. So this was the instruction given to them. And I generally, after joining a government college 5 years before, I started using a bilingual method, because entire lecture in English. Initially, I was doing it one for the first year. All my lectures were in English, and later on, I found it is of no use, literally. So I thought it's better to change and try and make the learners understand something. So, I mean, I'm just trying my best to use both, the regional language, Tamil and English in the classroom. So the instructions were given both in English as well as in Tamil, and a lot of scaffolding was done. So all of us know what I mean by scaffolding, giving them the language support as well as support in other ways also, because scaffolding was done from the beginning. From stage one, we need to give them support. So it's a 3-page story, but for a student of literature, it would not take, or a reader, one who's proficient, one was fairly good language skills, for him or for her, it would not take more than half an hour or at the most 20 minutes. But for these learners, it definitely would take more than 2 hours. Even, I mean, without support, it's very difficult. Even with support, it takes a lot of time for them. And some of them, while reading, they give it up because they find there are different words, unusual words. For them, it's totally an unfamiliar word. So they don't take the effort. So a lot of scaffolding was done from as a teacher, I had a lot of scaffolding from the beginning at various intervals. So what I observed was some of them were a bit reluctant, as usual. Most of the learners, not all learners, will be so enthusiastic, and that would be an ideal classroom, which no teacher can expect, whatever the task may be, whether it is be it literature or be it. So they don't take the effort. So a lot of scaffolding was done as a teacher. I had to do that. Yeah, I could hear my voice. Asab, Sri Prasad sir, are you there? Hello.
I'm here, sir. Please, sir.
Yeah. So a lot of scaffolding, because I suddenly heard the recording. That's what I thought. I'm checking out. Okay. So so some of them were a bit reluctant, and some learners were quite keen, but they admitted that they wanted to express their opinions in the regional language. So language was a major hindrance. They said, I have a lot of ideas, sir, but I just want to express in Tamil. I just said, go ahead, because I was quite happy to see some learners at least respond to the text. And it took almost an hour for them to understand the story, to make them understand this, what is the story all about. And then some of them wanted to express their views, what they felt. The intention, what I had, was to make them respond to the text. But what I observed was, during the discussion, there was a lot of digression. So the discussion didn't center around the story. So a lot of digression, in the sense they talked about their how they engage themselves in farming, how they help his father and in such activities. And one boy said, I have 4 cows at home, and I take care of them. I have to maintain those cows when I reach home, or early in the morning I wake up and I maintain the cows. I would definitely say it was just an eye opener for me. So because never did I get a chance to interact with the kids. It was just an eye opener, and I thought, okay, fine. But as I told you, it was totally a digression. It was not focused on the text, but it doesn't matter, because it provided an opportunity for the learners to open their mouth and say something, and it was an opportunity for me to listen to them as well, and get to know so much about farming. Okay. So what insights did I gain as a teacher? So the first point is, as a teacher, I understood that literary texts, but that is a word of caution. Not all literary texts. So we need to be very careful in the choice of the text. How do we select the text? Selection is very important. Not all texts might work. So it is very important that we choose a text which is fairly simple, and which has the plot which students can relate to. So I understood that this a certain literary text can be manipulated, will definitely work in the classroom. And the second point is, it is Showalter who said this, and I've taken their idea. So it helps learners personalize the reading experience or reactions to a text that help connect reading to students' lives. So it is sort of making them, understand that literature is not something, non it exists somewhere. It is not that I mean, you can see the connect between literature and life. So it was definitely, I mean, it is definitely a learning point for me too. So, and also for the learners, it should have been definitely. And it is also, I mean, just I apologize in case if I'm wrong. It is, I felt that it's somewhat similar to this reader response theory, wherein the reader becomes the writer. So I think it's Roland Barthes who talks about the death of the author, and it says like there is nothing called the text, or there is nothing on your computer screen. Whatever meaning making happens, it happens in your mind. So I could see that really happen, because though there was digression, students could largely connect to the text. They just made some kind of they made an attempt. So I'm not, again, we are making some tall claims that learners responded really well, and all of them spoke in English. That would definitely be a very tall claim. Those things didn't happen at all. The only minor change I could see was they tried their best to respond in the classroom. Definitely not in English. Some of them tried, but after the first one or two sentences, they wanted to. I mean, sort of code switching was done. They said, "Sir, I want to speak in English. I mean, in Tamil." So then the next point is, it also like literature sometimes blends itself very well to be exploited in different ways. For example, the same text, the same story can be exploited for enriching the the linguistic skills of learners. So there are, in the excerpt you would have seen, "Do you like class?" And there are so much language there. So as a teacher, what I thought is, yes, it can be exploited even to teach question forms, which for the learner is very, very challenging. Yes, no questions. So can be taught, I thought, okay, fine, I'm using literature as a resource. And for personal growth. So one of the in one of the models, when I just shared my views, it says like literature can be used for personal gains to enrich their personality. Yes, to a large extent, it can definitely be exploited in different ways. And again, why did I show that excerpt is when McKinsey says it's quite unusual for boys of your age, because they want to become an engineer or a pilot, but you want to become a botanist. So this might be the starting point. This could trigger definitely a discussion in the class. So we can ask them what exactly the kind of aspirations these learners have. So it need not be something very great, but even if they come out with some interesting ideas, or they say like, I want to become an IAS officer, yes, there is a lot of scope for them. And as a teacher, we have to encourage them and say, yes, if you try your best and if you put in your best efforts, these things can definitely happen. So there is a lot of scope for personal growth when I tried this. And the learner's perception. So how the learner would view his perception would have, but I didn't, again, it's not empirical research wasn't done. It is just a very casual task, I would say. So I got the feel that the learner's perception towards literature changed to an extent, not all learners, I would say. So they would have thought literature is nothing, something esoteric, just like something, I mean, like something like philosophy. I mean, we always feel this, the philosophers' base are sometimes inscrutable. So it changed their perception. So to an extent, they would have thought, okay, literature is not something, out there. It is, it is something, what we can relate to it if I sincerely take that effort. And Lazarus sort of sums up, and he says like teachers have to draw on the range of insights available, and then to develop an approach appropriate and relevant to their needs. So this again takes us to the question of appropriate methodology and social context. And this is the title of the book by Adrian Holiday. It's a wonderful resource book wherein he discusses in detail the importance of context in choosing a methodology. So we cannot just like to choose any methodology. We have to choose a methodology which will work in an appropriate context. In your classroom, one methodology would have to an extent worked. I mean, if at least like in your classroom, in a sense, like if you are in a different, state or in a different country with different set of learners, yes, but the same task or the same learning material or the same literature text need not work in my classroom. So we have to think that we have to think that the teaching context is very important. And it's a wonderful book by Adrian Holiday, Appropriate Methodology and Social Context. So I think I'm almost done with my presentation. So I would like to conclude my presentation. It's one of my favorite lines, I would say, in literature, and I think all of us would have definitely read. If winter comes, can spring be far behind? So why I chose, I mean, this line was quite inspiring because in the current scenario, when the entire world is reeling under the pandemic, there is one, the literature gives us a hope. It says like, don't worry, things will definitely be all right. So if winter comes, can spring be far behind? And I hope webinars like this provide a lot of opportunities and create meaningful discussions, which would largely benefit the teaching and the learning community. And I sincerely hope all of us as teachers will get back to our classrooms and interact with the learners with renewed interest and vigor. Thank you so much for your patient listening. Hello?
Hello, that's it. This is
Yes.
Ranjit here. Yeah.
Yeah, tell me, sir. Tell me, sir. So
Yeah.
I'm done with it. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So can you stop sharing that screen?
Just a minute.